The distant wail of a train whistle echoed across the vast Wyoming landscape as Zara Ellis stumbled through the brush, her once fine riding boots worn nearly to shreds. Blood trickled from a cut above her eyebrow, mingling with dirt and sweat on her face. 3 days she'd been running, 3 days since the massacre at her father's ranch that had left her family dead and her the sole survivor, hunted by the men who'd taken everything from her. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she pushed through tall prairie grass. Her legs trembled beneath her, muscles screaming in protest with each step. When her knees finally buckled, she fell hard against the rocky ground, no longer able to summon the strength to rise again. Her vision blurred as exhaustion claimed her, and the last thing she saw before darkness took her was a dust cloud on the horizon, riders approaching. When consciousness returned, Zara found herself draped over the back of a horse, her wrists bound to the saddle horn. Panic surged through her veins as she attempted to orient herself. "Easy there," a deep voice cautioned. "You're safe now." She twisted her head to glimpse the speaker, a tall man with broad shoulders and a sun-weathered face partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the horizon as they rode. "Who are you?" she rasped, her throat painfully dry. "Name's Quentin Foster," he answered without looking at her. "Found you passed out on Blackwater Creek land." "Untie me," she demanded, though her voice lacked conviction. "Can't do that just yet, madam. Not until I know you ain't running from the law." "I'm not a criminal," she protested weakly. "Never said you were, but folks running this hard usually have someone after them, law or otherwise." He adjusted his hat. "We'll be at my place soon enough. Then we can sort this out proper." True to his word, within the hour they approached a modest homestead nestled against the base of a rocky hill. A small cabin with a covered porch stood beside a barn and corral. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, promising warmth inside. Once they reached the yard, Quentin dismounted in one fluid motion and gently helped Zara down. Her legs, stiff from the ride, nearly gave out again, but he caught her elbow, steadying her. Now that she stood before him, she noticed how tall he really was, towering over her by nearly a foot. "I've got no interest in turning you over to anyone," he said, finally untying her wrists. "But I won't harbor a fugitive either. The only crime I've committed is surviving," she replied bitterly. Something in her tone gave him pause. His eyes, which she now saw were a striking shade of blue, studied her intently before he nodded once. "Come on inside," he said, leading the way to the cabin door. The interior was surprisingly neat and comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while a simple wooden table and chairs occupied the center of the main room. Through an open doorway, she glimpsed a bedroom with a neatly made iron bed. Quentin gestured toward a rocking chair. "Sit. I'll fetch some water." Zara collapsed into the chair, suddenly aware of how filthy she was. Dirt caked her clothing, and dried blood stiffened the fabric of her once fine blouse. Her fingers went instinctively to her hair, finding it tangled beyond belief, matted with dirt, blood, and sweat. When Quentin returned with a cup of cool water, she drank it gratefully, almost choking in her haste. "Slow down," he advised. "There's plenty more." After she'd emptied the cup twice more, he took it from her and set it aside. Then, with unexpected gentleness, he pushed a strand of her matted hair away from her face, examining the cut on her forehead. Her hair was matted from days on the run, he murmured, almost to himself. Then, more clearly, he said, "There's a bath and time to heal, if you've a mind to accept my hospitality." Zara stared at him, searching for deceit in his expression, but finding none. "Why would you help me?" "You don't know me." "I know enough," he replied. "I know you're running from something terrible. I know you're at the end of your strength. And I know what it's like to need a safe harbor when the whole world's turned against you." Something in his words broke through the walls she'd built around herself. Tears welled in her eyes, the first she'd allowed herself since witnessing her family's murder. "My name is Zara Ellis," she managed between ragged breaths. 3 days ago, men came to my father's ranch. They killed everyone, my father, my brother, our ranch hands. I only escaped because I was out riding. When I returned, her voice faltered. Quentin nodded, his expression grim. "The Hargrove gang?" Her head snapped up. "You know them?" "By reputation. They've been terrorizing ranches across the territory. taking what they want and leaving no witnesses. He paused. Except you. They don't know I saw them, she explained. But they'll know someone survived when they find only 4 bodies instead of 5. They'll come looking. Well, they won't find you here, he stated firmly. My place is off the main trails. Few folks even know it exists. He moved to a large wooden chest in the corner and retrieved a clean shirt and pair of trousers that would clearly swim on her smaller frame. These will have to do until your clothes are washed. He pointed to a door at the back of the cabin. Washrooms through there. I'll heat water for a bath. While Quentin busied himself carrying buckets of water from the pump outside to heat on the stove, Zara remained in the rocking chair, trying to process the dramatic shift in her circumstances. Just hours ago, she'd been certain she would die alone in the wilderness. Now, this stranger was offering sanctuary. "Why are you doing this?" she asked when he returned with the last bucket. He paused, considering her question. "My ma always said to judge a man by how he treats those who can offer him nothing in return." He shrugged. "Besides, seems to me you've seen enough cruelty to last a lifetime. Bit of kindness might help balance the scales." 40 minutes later, Zara lowered herself into the tin bathtub filled with steaming water. The initial sting against her cuts and scrapes soon gave way to blessed relief as days of grime began to dissolve. She ducked her head beneath the surface, wetting her tangled hair, then reached for the bar of soap Quentin had provided. The simple act of washing felt like a resurrection. With each pass of the soap across her skin, she reclaimed a small piece of herself from the horror she'd endured. By the time she'd scrubbed her hair 3 times, working through the worst of the knots with her fingers, she felt almost human again. Quentin's clothes hung loosely on her frame, but they were clean and soft against her skin. She rolled up the sleeves and pant legs, then cinched the waist with a piece of rope he'd provided. Looking at her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized herself. Her face was thinner, her eyes haunted by shadows that hadn't been there a week ago. When she emerged from the washroom, she found Quentin at the stove, stirring something in a cast-iron pot that filled the cabin with a savory aroma. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and for a moment, he simply stared. "Better?" he asked finally. "Yes, thank you." She self-consciously touched her damp hair, which still bore evidence of her ordeal despite her efforts. "I couldn't get all the tangles out." He nodded toward the table, where he'd laid out a comb and a pair of scissors. "Thought you might need these." The thoughtfulness of the gesture nearly undid her again. She sat at the table and began the painful process of combing through her long, dark hair. Each tangle represented another memory of her flight through the wilderness branches that had snagged her as she ran. Nights spent sleeping on the hard ground, moments when despair had nearly overcome her will to survive. Quentin served up bowls of hearty stew and thick slices of bread, then sat across from her. Watching as she alternated between eating ravenously and attacking the stubborn knots in her hair. "You'll rip half of it out that way," he observed after several minutes. "Some of it may be beyond saving," she admitted, wincing as the comb caught on a particularly stubborn tangle. Without another word, he rose and moved behind her chair. His large hands gently took the comb from her fingers. "My sister used to let me help with her hair when we were kids," he explained. "Said I had the patience for it." Zara stiffened at first as he began working on a section of her hair, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. With methodical care, he separated the strands, working from the ends upward as he'd seen his sister do. "Where is your sister now?" Zara asked, trying to distract herself from the strange intimacy of the moment. "Back east. Philadelphia, married a banker, and never looked back." There was no bitterness in his voice, only a hint of wistfulness. "Smart girl. Always knew there was more to life than Wyoming territory could offer. And you? No wife waiting somewhere while you rescue strays?" His hands paused briefly. "No. No wife." They fell into silence as he continued his task, occasionally reaching for the scissors to cut away a knot that couldn't be salvaged. By the time he finished, the floor around her chair was littered with small bits of hair, but her head felt lighter, and when she ran her fingers through the damp strands, they moved freely. "Thank you," she said softly. "Eat your stew before it gets cold," he replied, returning to his seat. As darkness fell outside, Quentin lit the oil lamps and stoked the fire in the hearth. The cabin, which had seemed merely functional in daylight, took on a warm, almost cozy atmosphere in the golden lamplight. "You should take the bed," he said, gesturing toward the bedroom. "I'll sleep out here by the fire." Too exhausted to protest, Zara nodded gratefully. "In the morning, I should move on. I've already endangered you enough by being here. The Hargroves don't know about this place," he countered. "And even if they did, they'd find more than they bargained for." His hand drifted briefly to the revolver, holstered at his hip. "I can't ask you to fight my battles." "You didn't ask, I'm offering." He met her gaze steadily. "Besides, you're in no condition to travel, not yet. Rest, heal, then we'll figure out what comes next." Logic told her to refuse, to continue running at first light. But the thought of facing the wilderness again, alone and hunted, was more than she could bear. She nodded once, then retreated to the bedroom, where she fell asleep almost the instant her head touched the pillow. The screams of her dying family invaded her dreams, jerking her awake in the darkest hours of the night. Heart pounding, she sat upright, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she remembered she was in Quentin Foster's cabin. Unable to face the prospect of more nightmares, she slipped from the bed and padded quietly to the main room. The fire had burned low, casting just enough light to see Quentin's sleeping form on a bedroll near the hearth. Not wishing to disturb him, she moved silently to the window, gazing out at the starlit landscape. "Bad dreams!" His voice startled her. She turned to find him sitting up, fully alert. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." He stood and added another log to the fire. "I sleep light these days." "These days?" He didn't immediately answer, instead moving to the kitchen area, where he pumped water into a kettle and set it on the stove. "Tea helps sometimes," he said, still avoiding her question. "You were a soldier," she guessed, noting the precise way he moved, the alertness that never quite left his eyes. "Union cavalry, 8 years. He nodded toward a trunk in the corner. "Kept the uniform, though I rarely wear it now. The war has been over for nearly a decade." "Some wars never really end," he replied cryptically, measuring tea leaves into a pot. "At least not in here." He tapped his temple. They sat at the table with steaming mugs of tea, the silence between them comfortable rather than strained. Zara studied him in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar that bisected one eyebrow, the calloused hands that held his mug with surprising delicacy. "How did you end up here?" she asked. "Seems an isolated life for a man used to cavalry units." "That's precisely why." He took a sip of his tea. "After so many years surrounded by men and horses and constant movement, I crave solitude." He gestured around the cabin. "Built this place myself. Closest neighbors 5 miles away, and that suits me fine." "Don't you get lonely?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Solitude and loneliness aren't the same thing, Miss Ellis. Please, call me Zara." "Zara, then?" He said her name carefully, as if testing the feel of it on his tongue. "What about you? Were you always at your father's ranch?" She traced the rim of her mug with one finger. "No. I was away at school in Denver until last year. My mother died when I was 14, and father thought a proper education would serve me better than ranch life." A bitter laugh escaped her. "He wanted to protect me from the harshness of the frontier. Yet here I am, the only one left." "Why did you return?" "Father took ill last winter. My brother James wrote that I should come home." She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. "Father recovered, thank God. But while I was home, I realized how much I'd missed Wyoming. The open spaces, the mountains, even the hardships they're part of me in a way the city never was." Quentin nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The land gets in your blood." "Yes," she agreed softly. "Though now, I don't know if I can ever look at it the same way again. Not after what happened." "The land didn't betray you," he said. "Men did. Bad men. Men who are still out there. Men who will keep killing unless they're stopped." His expression hardened. "The law will catch up to them eventually." "The law?" She set down her mug with enough force to slosh tea onto the table. "The nearest marshal is in Cheyenne, 2 days' ride from my father's ranch. By the time word reaches him, the Hargroves will be long gone. What would you have me do? Hunt them down myself? No, she said quickly. No, I would never ask that, but I can't simply hide and hope justice finds them someday. Sometimes survival is victory enough, he replied. You're alive when they meant you dead. That's already more than they bargained for. They talked until false dawn lightened the eastern sky, sharing pieces of their lives that seemed safe to reveal. Quentin spoke of his childhood in Illinois, his decision to join the Union Army at 19, the battles that had shaped him. Zara told him about her schooling in Denver, her passion for literature, her stubborn determination to master the skills of ranching despite her father's protests. As sunlight began streaming through the windows, Quentin rose to prepare breakfast. Zara watched him move around the small kitchen, efficient and at ease in the domestic task. He wasn't what she'd expected from a solitary ex-cavalry officer. There was a gentleness to him that belied his rugged exterior. Over plates of fried potatoes and salt pork, they discussed practical matters. Your clothes need mending, he noted. I'm handy with basic repairs, but anything fancy is beyond my skills. I can mend them myself if you have needle and thread. In that chest by the window, he hesitated. I'll ride into town tomorrow, get you some proper women's things. Can't have you wearing my clothes indefinitely. I have no money to repay you, she admitted. Did I ask for payment? He raised an eyebrow. No, but... Then there's no issue, he interrupted. Consider it a loan if your pride demands it. You can repay me when you're able. After breakfast, Quentin showed her around the homestead, the vegetable garden behind the cabin, the chicken coop where half a dozen hens scratched in the dirt, the small corral where his horse and mule grazed peacefully. Everything was meticulously maintained, a testament to his disciplined nature. It's not much, he said as they completed the tour, but it's mine, free and clear. It's wonderful, she replied sincerely. You've built something real here. A hint of color touched his cheekbones at her praise. There's always more to do. A man's work is never finished on a homestead. Nor a woman's, she added with a small smile. That day established a pattern that would continue for the next week. During daylight hours, they worked side by side, Zara tending the garden and chickens, mending clothes and cooking meals, while Quentin repaired fences, chopped wood, and tended to the livestock. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, talking long into the night, finding unexpected common ground, despite their different backgrounds. Zara's strength returned rapidly with regular meals and rest. The haunted look in her eyes gradually faded, though Quentin often heard her crying softly in the night when she thought he was asleep. He never mentioned it, understanding all too well the private nature of grief. On the fourth day, he rode into the small town of Piney Creek, returning with supplies and a bundle of clothing. For Zara, simple but well-made dresses, undergarments, a pair of sturdy boots, and even a pretty blue ribbon for her hair. When she protested the extravagance, he simply shrugged. A woman needs her own things, was all he said. That night, wearing one of the new dresses, Zara felt more herself than she had since the attack. As they sat at the table playing a game of checkers, she found herself studying Quentin's face in the lamplight, noticing how his serious expression softened when he smiled, how tiny lines crinkled at the corners of his eyes. "You're staring, Miss Ellis," he observed, without looking up from the game board. Caught, she felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just thinking how strange it is that I feel safer here with a man I've known less than a week than I ever did in Denver, surrounded by locks and lawmen." He made his move, capturing one of her checkers. Safety isn't always about locks and lawmen. Sometimes it's about being with someone who sees the world the same way you do. And do we see the world the same way? He finally looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers directly. "I believe we're starting to." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was ready to name. Zara was the first to look away, returning her attention to the game. But something had shifted. Subtle, yet undeniable, like the first hint of spring after a long winter. On the morning of the 7th day, Quentin announced he needed to check his trap lines in the hills. "I won't be gone more than a few hours," he assured her. "Keep the rifle close just in case, but I don't expect trouble." Zara nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of anxiety at the thought of being alone. "I'll be fine. I have bread to bake, and that shirt of yours still needs patching." After he departed, she threw herself into household tasks, finding comfort in the routine. She was elbow-deep in bread dough when a sound from outside caught her attention: horses approaching. For a moment, hope rose that Quentin had returned early, but it was quickly replaced by fear as she realized there were multiple riders. Wiping her hands hastily, she moved to the window, staying to one side to avoid being seen. 3 men on horseback had entered the yard. Even at a distance, she recognized 2 of them members of the Hargrove gang. Terror froze her in place as memories of the ranch massacre flashed through her mind. Moving silently, she retrieved the rifle Quentin had left and checked that it was loaded. Then she positioned herself behind the heavy wooden table, which she'd tipped onto its side for cover, and waited. The knock, when it came, sounded almost friendly. "Hello, the house," called a gruff voice. "Anybody home?" Zara remained silent, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain they must hear it. "Saw smoke from the chimney," the voice continued. "Just looking for some directions. Maybe a bit of water for our horses." Still, she didn't respond. Long seconds passed before she heard muttered conversation outside, followed by the creak of the porch steps as someone approached the door. The door handle turned slowly, then stopped locked from inside. There was a pause. Then a heavy boot slammed against the wood, splintering it around the lock. The door burst open, and a burly man with a thick beard stepped inside, hand resting on his holstered pistol. "Well now," he drawled, spotting Zara behind the overturned table. "What have we here?" "Don't come any closer," she warned, raising the rifle. 2 more men appeared in the doorway behind him. One of them, thin-faced with a scar across his chin, squinted at her. "Hey, Hargrove," he said. "Ain't that the Ellis girl? The one that wasn't at the ranch?" The bearded man, Hargrove himself, studied her more carefully. "By God. I think you're right, Deke. Thought the wolves would have got you by now, girl." "Back away," Zara commanded, struggling to keep the rifle steady. "I'll shoot." Hargrove laughed. "No, you won't. Your daddy had the same look right before I put a bullet in him. All bluster, no backbone." Something snapped inside Zara at the casual mention of her father's murder. Without conscious thought, she squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report was deafening in the confined space, and the bullet tore through Hargrove's shoulder, spinning him halfway around. "You shot me!" he roared, more surprised than pained. "You actually shot me!" His companions drew their weapons, but before they could fire, another shot rang out, this one from outside. The man called Deke crumpled to the ground, blood blooming across his chest. "Get down!" came Quentin's shout from somewhere near the barn. Zara dropped to the floor as bullets shattered the window above her. Glass rained down, and she covered her head with her arms, praying that Quentin was well hidden. The firefight that followed seemed to last hours, but was over in minutes. 2 more shots from Quentin's rifle found their marks, one killing the 3rd gang member outright, the other striking Hargrove in the leg as he attempted to reach his horse. When silence finally fell, Zara raised her head cautiously. Through the broken window, she could see Hargrove dragging himself toward the tree line, leaving a trail of blood on the dusty ground. She retrieved the rifle and moved to the doorway, stepping carefully over Deke's body. "Quentin," she called anxiously. "Here." He emerged from behind the woodpile, his own rifle still at the ready. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "Hargrove's getting away," she said, pointing to the wounded man's crawling form. With deadly precision, Quentin raised his rifle and fired once more. Hargrove collapsed, unmoving. "Not anymore," Quentin said grimly. They stood in the yard, surrounded by the aftermath of violence, neither speaking for long moments. Then Zara began to shake, fine tremors at first that quickly became uncontrollable. The rifle slipped from her grasp and her knees buckled. Quentin caught her before she hit the ground, gathering her against his chest as she sobbed. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "It's really over now." Later, after they had buried the bodies far from the cabin and cleaned away the blood, they sat side by side on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of orange and gold. Quentin had bandaged a graze on his forearm, the only injury he'd sustained, and Zara had swept up the broken glass, nailing a blanket over the window until proper repairs could be made. 3 of them, Quentin mused, Hargrove and 2 others. Were there more at your father's ranch? 5 altogether, she replied. These 3, plus 2 more. Then there are still 2 out there. She nodded slowly. Yes, but they were heading to Montana, according to what I overheard before I fled. Something about a bank in Helena. The territorial marshal should be notified. We can send word from Piney Creek. She turned to look at him. If not for you, I would be dead now. If not for your shot, I might not have had time to position myself, he countered. You saved yourself as much as I saved you. She considered this, finding unexpected comfort in the thought. Either way, I can't stay here. Not now that they've found this place. They found it by chance, he pointed out. They weren't looking for you specifically. Just happened upon the cabin. Still, it's not safe. Few places are truly safe in this territory. He sighed. But if you feel you must go, I understand. The thought of leaving brought an unexpected pain to her chest. In just a week, this cabin had become more home to her than her father's ranch had been since her return from Denver. Or perhaps it wasn't the cabin at all, but the man beside her who made it feel like home. Where would I go? She wondered aloud. You could return to Denver. There's nothing for me there anymore. Your father's ranch, then. It's still yours by right. She shuddered. I don't think I could live there again, not after what happened. Then stay. The words came quickly, almost urgently. Stay here. She looked at him in surprise. Here? With you? Yes. His gaze was steady, certain. There's room enough, work enough for 2, and I find that I've grown accustomed to your company. Is that all it is? You've grown accustomed to me? Something vulnerable flickered in his eyes. No, he admitted softly. It's more than that, much more. But I wouldn't presume to. She silenced him by placing her hand over his. I've grown more than accustomed to you as well, Quentin Foster. The smile that transformed his face then was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, radiant and full of promise. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned toward her. Their lips met in a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened as she responded with unexpected fervor. When they finally separated, both breathing faster than normal, he rested his forehead against hers. I never expected you, he whispered. Never expected any of this. Nor I, she replied. But now I can't imagine being anywhere else, with anyone else. That night, for the first time since arriving at the cabin, Zara slept peacefully, free from nightmares. In the morning, they rode together to Piney Creek to report the incident to the local sheriff and send telegrams to the territorial marshals about the remaining Hargrove gang members. As they approached the small town, Zara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The men who had murdered her family were either dead or soon to be hunted by the law. She was safe, and more importantly, she was no longer alone. The sheriff, a barrel-chested man with a walrus mustache, listened to their account with growing alarm. The Hargroves, here in my jurisdiction, and you say you killed 3 of them? He eyed Quentin with newfound respect. That's no small feat, Mr. Foster. Miss Ellis deserves equal credit, Quentin replied. She wounded Hargrove first, giving me the opportunity to position myself. The sheriff turned his gaze to Zara, clearly reassessing her. Is that so? Well, madam, you've got more sand than most men I know. I did what was necessary to survive, she said simply. After filing their report and sending the telegrams, they visited the general store to purchase supplies to repair the cabin. The proprietor, a portly man named Wilkins, greeted Quentin warmly. Foster, twice in 1 week must be a record. His curious gaze shifted to Zara. And who might this lovely lady be? This is Miss Zara Ellis, Quentin replied. She's staying at my place for a while. Wilkins' eyebrows shot up, and Quentin quickly added, her father's ranch was attacked by outlaws. She's the sole survivor. Understanding replaced suspicion in the shopkeeper's expression. I'm mighty sorry to hear that, Miss Ellis. The frontier can be a cruel place. Yes, she agreed, but not without its kindnesses as well. She glanced at Quentin, who was studying a display of window glass. As they gathered their purchases, Wilkins leaned across the counter toward Zara. Foster's a good man, he said quietly. Keeps to himself mostly, but always fair in his dealings. Helped build the schoolhouse last year. Wouldn't take a penny for his labor. "I'm not surprised to hear it," she replied. "Just thought you should know, seeing as you're staying with him and all." She smiled. "I appreciate the information, Mr. Wilkins, but I've already formed my own favorable opinion of Mr. Foster." The shopkeeper nodded approvingly. "Smart girl. You could do a lot worse in these parts." On their way back to the cabin, they stopped at a small creek to water the horses. As Quentin knelt by the water's edge, filling their canteens, Zara studied his profile against the backdrop of distant mountains. "Mr. Wilkins seemed quite interested in our arrangement," she remarked. Quentin grimaced. "Small towns run on gossip. By sundown, everyone within 10 miles will know you're staying at my cabin. Does that bother you?" "Only if it bothers you." He stood, securing the caps on the canteens. "Folks might talk, but they won't interfere. It's not the way out here. People mind their business for the most part." "And what exactly is our arrangement, Quentin?" she asked, stepping closer to him. "Am I your guest? Your ward? Your—" "My heart's desire," he finished for her, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "If you'll have me." The naked honesty in his eyes took her breath away. Here was a man who had seen the worst of humanity during the war, who had chosen solitude rather than risk the pain of connection, yet who now offered himself to her without reservation. "I'll have you," she replied, reaching up to touch his face. "On one condition." "Name it." "That you'll have me as well, completely. Not as someone to protect or shelter, but as your equal partner in whatever life we build together." His smile was answer enough, but he sealed the promise with a kiss that left her dizzy and breathless. When they separated, he rested his hand against her cheek. "I've never met anyone like you, Zara Ellis, and I thank God every day that I found you by Blackwater Creek." "I think perhaps we found each other," she replied softly. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity as they repaired the damage to the cabin and settled into a rhythm of shared work and growing intimacy. Each night, they talked long into the darkness, learning the contours of each other's hearts as thoroughly as they were learning the contours of each other's bodies. Quentin spoke of battles he'd fought, of comrades lost, of the nightmares that still occasionally plagued him. Zara told him of her mother's death, of her struggles at the finishing school in Denver, where she'd never quite fit in, of her complicated relationship with her father, whom she'd loved deeply, despite his rigid ways. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a thunderstorm roll across the distant plains, Quentin took her hand in his. "I've been thinking," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant, "about us, about the future." "Oh," she encouraged when he fell silent. "This cabin, it's not much, certainly not what a woman like you deserves." "It's perfect," she insisted. "I've never felt more at home anywhere. Even so, I've been setting aside money, enough to add on another room, maybe 2, a proper kitchen. Perhaps even indoor plumbing someday." She turned to face him fully. "Quentin Foster, are you asking me to envision a future with you?" "I'm asking you to marry me," he stated plainly. "Though I'm making a mess of it, apparently." Joy bubbled up inside her, as bright and unexpected as wildflowers after a spring rain. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." His face lit up with such pure happiness that it nearly brought tears to her eyes. "You will?" "Of course I will, you impossible man." She laughed, throwing her arms around his neck. "Did you honestly think I might refuse? I thought you might want more time. It's only been a month since you arrived here. A month in which I've seen you at your best and worst, and you've certainly seen me at mine." She traced the line of his jaw with her fingertip. "I know what I want. Quentin, I want you. I want us." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Piney Creek. The ceremony was simple, attended by the handful of neighbors within riding distance and a few townspeople who had become friends. Zara wore a cream-colored dress ordered specially from Cheyenne, with the blue ribbon Quentin had bought her woven into her hair. As they exchanged vows, Zara thought of how far she had come from that desperate day when she'd collapsed by Blackwater Creek, certain her life was over. Instead, it had only been beginning. The territorial marshal arrived in Piney Creek the day after the wedding, bringing news that the remaining members of the Hargrove gang had been captured in Montana. They would stand trial for multiple murders, including those of the Ellis family. The marshal also brought papers confirming Zara's inheritance of her father's ranch, 500 acres of prime grazing land that was now legally hers. "What will you do with it?" Quentin asked as they rode home from town with the deed safely tucked in his saddlebag. She considered the question carefully. "I don't want to live there, but I don't want to sell it either. It's been in my family for 2 generations. "We could work it from here," he suggested. "It's only a half-day's ride. I could help you hire trustworthy hands to manage the daily operations." "You would do that? Take on a cattle ranch in addition to your homestead?" "I would do anything that brings you peace, Zara Foster." The name still sounded new on his tongue, a wonder he hadn't quite grown accustomed to. "Besides, I worked cattle before the war. It's not foreign to me." She leaned across the space between their horses to kiss him quickly. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "You have, but I never tire of hearing it." As summer gave way to autumn, they established a routine that included regular visits to the Ellis Ranch, where they hired a foreman and 3 hands to manage the growing herd of cattle. The ranch house itself remained closed, its painful memories locked away until Zara felt ready to face them. Meanwhile, true to his word, Quentin began expanding their cabin, adding a proper bedroom, and enlarging the kitchen. Zara planted a larger garden, putting up preserves for the winter, and learning to make soap and candles from one of the neighboring women. Their life wasn't without challenges. Winter brought blizzards that isolated them for weeks at a time. Spring brought flooding that nearly washed out the road to town. And there were still nights when one or both of them woke from nightmares, seeking comfort in each other's arms. But through it all, they found a happiness neither had thought possible. Their love, born in the aftermath of tragedy, proved resilient enough to weather whatever the frontier threw at them. On their first anniversary, Quentin presented Zara with a gift, a small wooden cradle he had crafted himself. "It might be presumptuous," he admitted as she ran her fingers over the smooth wood, "but I thought, that is, I hoped." "It's perfect timing," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "I confirmed it with Mrs. Peterson last week. She says the baby should arrive by winter's end." The joy that flooded his face was everything she had hoped for. "A baby," he breathed, dropping to his knees to press his ear against her abdomen. "Our baby. The first of several, I hope," she said, threading her fingers through his hair. He looked up at her with such adoration that it made her heart ache. "I never thought I would have this," he confessed. "A woman who loves me, a child on the way, a real home." "Nor did I," she replied softly, "especially not after what happened at the ranch. I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning." "Our life," she corrected, pulling him to his feet and into her embrace. "The one we're building together." As they stood in the cabin that had become their haven, Zara reflected on the strange, twisted path that had brought her here. Had the Hargroves not attacked her family's ranch? Had she not fled for her life? Had Quentin not found her collapsed by Blackwater Creek? Any deviation in that chain of events would have led her elsewhere, to a different life entirely. Yet here she stood, in the arms of the man she loved more than she had thought possible, carrying their child beneath her heart. From the depths of tragedy had come a joy so profound, it sometimes left her breathless. "What are you thinking?" Quentin asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best," she replied, "and that I'm grateful selfishly, perhaps that my path led me to you." "Not selfish," he countered, "just human. We make sense of suffering by finding the good that follows. And you, Quentin Foster, are the very best good that could have followed." He kissed her then, tenderly at first, then with increasing passion, until they were both breathless with desire and love. Later, as they lay in their bed watching moonlight paint silver patterns on the wall, Quentin placed his palm against Zara's stomach, where their child grew stronger each day. "I've been thinking about names," he said. "Already? We have months yet." "I know, but I can't help it." He traced idle patterns on her skin. "What do you think about James if it's a boy? After your brother?" Tears pricked her eyes at the thoughtfulness of the suggestion. "James Foster," she tested the name aloud. "I like it. And for a girl? I thought perhaps Elizabeth, after my mother. James or Elizabeth Foster," she mused. "Strong names for a child of the frontier. A child who will grow up loved beyond measure," he added. "That is certain." She placed her hand over his. "No matter what hardships come, and they will, this being Wyoming territory, our child will never doubt that they are loved." Winter came early that year, blanketing the homestead in deep snow by mid-November. Quentin worked tirelessly to ensure they were prepared, the woodpile stacked high, the root cellar filled with preserved vegetables, the smokehouse hung with cured meat. As Zara's pregnancy progressed, he took on more of the daily chores, insisting she rest whenever possible. "You're coddling me," she protested one afternoon, as he refused to let her help bring in firewood. "I'm caring for my wife, an unborn child," he corrected. "There's a difference. I'm pregnant, not invalid." "Humor me," he requested, dropping a kiss on her forehead. "It gives me peace of mind." She relented, recognizing the fear behind his protectiveness. This far from town, with a doctor's visit impossible until the spring thaw, they both understood the risks of childbirth on the frontier. Zara had arranged for Mrs. Peterson, who had delivered half the babies in the territory, to stay with them when her time came. But until then, Quentin's anxiety manifested in his insistence on shielding her from any potential strain. As her due date approached, they spent long evenings by the fire, Quentin reading aloud from one of the few books they owned, while Zara knitted tiny garments for the baby. Outside, the winter winds howled, but within their cabin, all was warmth and anticipation. James Foster entered the world on a clear, cold February morning, healthy and strong, lunged, with a shock of dark hair that matched his mother's. Mrs. Peterson pronounced him perfect in every way, and Quentin, who had paced anxiously outside during the delivery, nearly collapsed with relief when invited in to meet his son. "He's magnificent," he whispered, carefully taking the swaddled infant in his arms. "Look what we made, Zara." Exhausted but radiant, Zara watched the tenderness with which her husband held their child. "He has your eyes," she observed, "or he will, once they settle." "Poor lad," Quentin joked, though his own eyes shone with unshed tears. "Let's hope he gets your brains and beauty to compensate." Mrs. Peterson stayed for a week, teaching Zara the finer points of infant care before returning to her own home. Then it was just the three of them, learning to be a family amid the quiet rhythms of their homestead life. Spring came late that year, but arrived with a burst of wildflowers that carpeted the hills around their cabin. As soon as the roads were passable, Quentin hitched the wagon and took Zara and little James into town, proudly introducing his son to everyone they met. "He's got the Foster chin," observed Mr. Wilkins at the general store, "but those are Ellis eyes if ever I saw them." "He's the best of both of us," Zara replied, adjusting the blanket around her sleeping infant. On their way home, they stopped at the Ellis ranch to introduce James to the foreman and Hans, all of whom had become extended family of sorts. The ranch was prospering under their joint management. The cattle herd nearly doubled since the previous year. "We should open the house," Zara said suddenly as they drove past the main building, which had remained shuttered since the attack. "Air it out, make it livable again." Quentin glanced at her in surprise. "Are you certain? There's no rush, you know." "I'm certain," she replied firmly. "I can't let what happened there forever taint the place. It was a happy home once. It could be again not our primary residence, but a place we could stay when working the ranch. A legacy for James someday." He reached across the wagon seat to squeeze her hand. "Then we'll open it, together." The following week, they returned with cleaning supplies and fresh linens. Quentin forced open windows that had been sealed for nearly 2 years, letting spring air flush away the mustiness. Zara, with James strapped to her chest, moved from room to room, removing dust covers from furniture and washing away cobwebs. In her father's study, she paused before his portrait that still hung above the fireplace. "I wish you could have met your grandson," she said softly. "He has your stubborn streak already." She felt Quentin's presence before his hands came to rest on her shoulders. "They would have been proud of you," he said, "of all you've endured, all you've built." "All we've built," she corrected, leaning back against him. "I couldn't have done any of it without you." "You would have found a way," he said with absolute conviction. "You're the strongest person I've ever known, Zara Foster." They spent the night in the ranch house, the first time Zara had slept there since fleeing for her life. There were moments when shadows in the corners seemed to take the shape of remembered horrors, but with Quentin beside her and James sleeping peacefully in his cradle, The ghosts eventually retreated. By summer's end, they had established a new routine, spending most of their time at the cabin homestead, but making weekly trips to oversee the ranch operations. They hired a young woman from town to help with James during these visits, and Zara found herself increasingly comfortable moving between her two homes. As James grew from infant to toddler, their lives expanded to accommodate his curiosity and energy. Quentin built him toys, wooden horses, and wagons that the boy dragged everywhere, and constructed a small fence around a portion of the yard where he could play safely. On James's second birthday, Zara made an announcement over the special dinner she had prepared. "We should consider expanding the cabin again," she suggested casually. Quentin looked up from helping James with his cake. "Oh, what did you have in mind?" "Another bedroom," she replied, watching his face. "We're going to need it by next winter." It took a moment for her meaning to register, but when it did, his expression transformed from confusion to wonder. "Really? You're certain?" She nodded, smiling at his reaction. "Mrs. Peterson confirmed it yesterday. Our family is growing again." He was across the table in an instant, lifting her from her chair in a careful embrace. "Another baby," he murmured against her hair. "Oh, Zara. Are you pleased? Pleased? I'm overjoyed." He set her gently on her feet, then knelt to address James. "Did you hear that, son? You're gonna be a big brother." James, more interested in his cake than this news, merely grinned toothily and continued eating with his fingers. Elizabeth Foster arrived with considerably less drama than her brother had, born on a mild autumn day with the assistance of not only Mrs. Peterson, but also the new doctor who had recently established practice in Piney Creek. She was a quiet baby, watchful where James had been boisterous, with a tuft of reddish hair that Quentin swore came from his side of the family. "She looks like my sister," he said, cradling the infant with practiced ease. Same thoughtful expression. "God help us if she has the Ellis temper to go with it," Zara joked. "One strong-willed child is enough in any family." As their family grew, so too did their operation. The Ellis Ranch flourished under their management, and they purchased adjacent land to expand their holdings. Quentin proved to have a natural head for business, while Zara's education gave her the skills to keep meticulous records and correspond with cattle buyers as far away as Chicago. By the time James was 5 and Elizabeth 3, the Fosters had become one of the most respected ranching families in the territory. The cabin homestead had been expanded into a proper house with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and even the indoor plumbing Quentin had once dreamed of providing. Yet, despite their success, they remained at heart the same couple who had found each other in the aftermath of tragedy. Quentin still rose before dawn each day, and Zara still planted her garden with the same care she had when they could barely afford seed. On the 7th anniversary of the day Quentin had found Zara by Blackwater Creek, they rode out alone together, leaving the children in the capable hands of their housekeeper. They packed a picnic lunch and made their way to the spot where their story had begun. The creek looked peaceful now, bordered by cottonwoods and willows, with no hint of the desperate circumstances that had brought them together. They spread a blanket on the grassy bank and sat side by side, hands intertwined. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been?" Zara asked, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. "If the Hargroves hadn't come to my father's ranch, if you hadn't found me that day." "Sometimes," Quentin admitted, "I'd likely still be living alone in that one-room cabin, growing more hermit-like by the year. And I might have married some businessman in Denver, hosting tea parties and pretending to be something I'm not." He squeezed her hand. "Do you ever regret it? Not the loss of your family, of course, but the path your life has taken since." She turned to face him fully, still struck after all these years by the depth of feeling his blue eyes could convey. "Not for a single moment," she said, with absolute conviction. "The tragedy that brought me to you was terrible beyond words. I would give anything to have my father and brother back, but loving you, building this life with you, raising our children together, I could never regret that." "Nor could I," he replied softly. "You saved me, Zara Foster, in ways I didn't even know I needed saving." "We saved each other," she corrected, "and continue to do so every day." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the landscape, they gathered their things and mounted their horses for the ride home. Their children would be waiting, eager to hear stories and receive the small gifts they always brought back from their outings. Their home would be warm and welcoming, filled with the accumulated treasures of their years together. Riding side by side across the open country that had claimed their hearts, Quentin reached across to take Zara's hand once more. "Do you remember what I said to you that first day in the cabin?" he asked. She smiled, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. Her hair was matted from days on the run, she quoted softly. "The cowboy said, 'There's a bath and time to heal.' I had no idea then how much healing we would both find," he said, "or how completely you would transform my life. Our lives," she corrected gently. "The ones we've built together. The ones we'll continue building for all the days to come." As they crested the final hill before their homestead came into view, Zara felt a familiar surge of gratitude for the twisted path that had led her here. From the darkest moments of her life had come a love deeper and more enduring than she had ever imagined possible, a love that had not only healed her wounds, but had given her the strength to build a new life from the ashes of the old. The setting sun gilded the landscape in shades of gold and amber, illuminating their home in the distance where their children waited. Side by side, they rode toward that light. Toward the future they continued to forge together with each passing day. In that moment, Zara knew with absolute certainty that regardless of what challenges might lie ahead, they would face them as they had faced all others together, drawing strength from a love that had been tested by fire and had emerged not merely intact, but stronger for the tempering. "Race you home?" Quentin suggested with a boyish grin that still, after all these years, made her heart skip a beat. "You'll lose," she warned, already gathering her reins. "I already won," he replied softly. "The day I found you." With shared laughter that echoed across the open prairie, they urged their horses forward, racing toward home and all that awaited them, their children, their future, and the continuing story of a love that had begun when a desperate woman with matted hair had found healing in the arms of a solitary cowboy who had never expected to open his heart again.